Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on VPATs and ACRs. I'm Kieran, an accessibility consultant here at UserVision, and I'm joined by my colleague Snigdha. You want to give a wee introduction, Snigdha?
Thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm Snigdha. I'm also an accessibility consultant at UserVision. I'm really looking forward to talking about ACRs and VPATs with you all and hearing about your experiences as well. Back to you, Kieran.
Great. Thank you very much, Snigdha. So over the next hour, we'll be exploring the importance of VPATs, or voluntary product accessibility templates, and ACRs, or accessibility conformance reports. So we'll guide you through what these documents are and how to effectively use them in the procurement process to ensure both legal compliance and meet accessibility standards. So just before we get started, we're going to do a quick Teams poll, just so we can get a better understanding of where you are at the moment in terms of how comfortable you are with creating or interpreting VPATs or ACRs. So we'd love to understand that just before we get started, and can learn a wee bit more about you all as well, which would be really great. Oh, I've had someone say somewhat comfortable, extremely uncomfortable. So hopefully we'll bump that up a little bit, and we'll then hopefully increase your knowledge a bit. Yeah, it looks like we're kind of sitting somewhat uncomfortable, neither comfortable nor comfortable, or uncomfortable. So yeah, we'll hopefully by the end of today, or the end of today's session, we'll bump that up a little bit more. Hopefully we'll get some extremely comfortables, which would be very exciting. So yeah, thank you all for your responses there. So that's great. Thank you very much. So just before we dive into the sort of specifics, let's quickly go over the main purposes of different accessibility documents. So namely accessibility statements, VPATs, and ACRs. So you may have seen accessibility statements on various websites such as news sites, social media platforms, and other government portals. These statements are designed for the general public and fall under the business to consumer, or B2C communications. Accessibility statements provide basic information or provide information about the accessibility features of a website or service, and demonstrate a commitment to accessibility for all users. On the other hand, accessibility conformance reports and VCRs serve a similar function by listing the accessibility features and issues, but it's specifically aimed more at businesses. So it's a tool for vendors to demonstrate their commitment to accessibility in a business-to-business or B2B context. So these reports are crucial in the procurement process, helping organizations evaluate the accessibility of products and services they plan to purchase. So now that we've looked at an overview of these documents, let's have a closer look at accessibility statements. So as we saw earlier, these are generally meant for the sort of general public and that sort of B2C. So it's important to understand, to start with accessibility statements, because they're often the first point of contact for users seeking information about a product's accessibility. So understanding what an accessibility statement is and how it differs from VPATs and ACRs is crucial. So starting with accessibility statements sets the foundation for understanding the broader context of accessibility documentation before going into the more detailed and technical aspects covered within VPATs and ACRs. So just before we get started, before we get looking at everything else, we'll just look at what an accessibility statement is. So an accessibility statement is a public declaration that outlines the accessibility status, policies, and practices of a website or application. Essentially, it serves as a formal communication from an organization about how accessible their digital content is to all users, including those with disabilities. So the statement normally conveys several key pieces of information. Firstly, it details the achieved level of conformance, providing transparency about the current status of a website or application. However, please note this is only really required for public sector. For private sector, it's not really needed and can sometimes be seen as a bit superfluous, and it's better just to explain where the issues are, as sometimes it can come across as a bit of a pat on the back if you're saying, oh, we've got a skip to link, or we've got whatever it may be. It can sometimes come across as a bit, you're just kind of showing off and you're not getting into the actual crux of what the document is about. So secondly, and most importantly, is identify any known issues. So offering users insight into areas where they might encounter difficulties. Thirdly, outline any planned improvements. This demonstrates the organisation's commitment to enhancing accessibility over time. And finally, providing users with guidance and workarounds. So offering practical advice to help users navigate any accessibility barriers they may face. So overall, an accessibility statement is a crucial tool for fostering trust and inclusivity, showing that an organisation values all users and is dedicated to making their digital content accessible for everyone. On the right-hand side here, we've got an example, a sample statement on the GDS website. So you can go have a look at this if you like as well. It might be good learning for you as well. So next up, we'll just quickly discuss sort of the key components of an accessibility statement. So now that we understand what it is, we can look at sort of these key components. So firstly, it should define the scope of what the statement covers. So this means specifying which parts of a website or application are included in the accessibility evaluations. It should also it should highlight examples of as accessibility features. However, as I said, this is mainly for more public sector, but it can be useful as well if you're just trying to guide users. But most importantly, it's about just acknowledging those known issues. This is an essential component. So it's important to be transparent about any areas where the website or application does not meet accessibility standards, just so that users are aware of potential challenges they may encounter. Compliance status is also a crucial component. This section indicates the level of conformance with accessibility standards such as WCAG or any European standards or whatever it may be. So it provides a benchmark for how accessible the website or application currently is. So this is useful for both users, but also kind of developers and other key stakeholders. It's also important to have the reasons for non-compliance. So this should be clear. This helps users understand why certain areas are not yet accessible and demonstrates the organisation's awareness of these issues. Also, providing contact information is vital so that users know who to contact should they encounter any issues that aren't already documented on the accessibility statement. And it should also have future plans and timelines. This offers insight into the organisation's ongoing commitment to improving accessibility. This section should detail any planned updates or initiatives aimed at enhancing accessibility features. And finally, the date of the last update. This is really important just so that users know if you're actively making changes to your website and that you do have accessibility in mind. So it's just really important to make sure that that's there as well, because if it's an outdated accessibility statement, then a user is probably going to assume that you don't really think about accessibility. So the last wee thing we're just going to discuss is why accessibility and statements are so important. So it's beneficial both to you and your users in significant ways. So firstly, there we go. So firstly, an accessibility statement demonstrates a commitment to inclusivity. By publicly declaring your efforts to make your digital content accessible, you show that your organisation values all users, including those with disabilities. Secondly, it helps ensure legal compliance and minimise legal risk. So many countries have laws and regulations mandating digital accessibility, and an accessibility statement is a key component in meeting those requirements. So it shows that you are taking necessary steps to comply with accessibility standards, but is also a proactive approach, not only to avoid legal repercussions, but also demonstrate your dedication to adhering to best practices. So by clearly outlining your compliance with accessibility standards and addressing known issues, you reduce the likelihood of kind of legal challenges related to accessibility. And also, it's important it also promotes transparency. So an accessibility statement provides users with clear information about your accessibility practices, known issues, and future plans. So this openness helps users understand what to expect and builds confidence in your organisation. So an organisation might struggle with being transparent about accessibility issues due to concerns about damage to their reputation. However, Failing to disclose these issues can actually erode trust over time. So by openly communicating through an accessibility statement, you can actually build trust, because they know, users will understand, oh, they actually care about accessibility, and they're fostering an environment where we can communicate and understand each other. Lastly, offering user support is an essential aspect. So the statement should include guidance and, as I mentioned, guidance and contact information. So this allows users just to kind of seek help, and should they encounter any accessibility barriers. Also, it helps build reputation and trust. By prioritizing accessibility and communicating your efforts transparently, you establish your organization as one that values inclusivity and social responsibility. This can enhance your brand's reputation and foster loyalty among users. So now that we've had a wee look at accessibility statements, we will now move on to more detail on VPATs, and I'll pass over to Snigdha.
Thank you, Kieran. So Kieran's given you an overview of accessibility statements, which are geared towards business-to-consumer communication. Now, let's shift to business communication, which is important for both buyers and sellers. So in terms of procurement, understanding and interpreting VPATs, that is voluntary product accessibility templates, can help ensure that the products and services that you work with are accessible. So knowing how to create VPATs is also important if you're a vendor looking to sell your products or services. But what exactly is a VPAT? Well, let's take a look. So a VPAT is a standardized template used to document a product's conformance with accessibility standards. It serves as a crucial tool for reporting on the accessibility of a product, particularly for individuals with disabilities. So the VPAT includes a summary of the product's accessibility features, conformance levels, and the evaluation methods used. This information helps potential buyers assess how well the product meets specific accessibility requirements. VPATs are often required in the procurement processes, especially within the public sector, and this is again to ensure that the products and services being procured are accessible to all users. So how does a VPAT differ from an accessibility statement? First, consider the audience. A VPAT is primarily intended for procurement teams and regulatory bodies to help them make informed purchasing decisions and ensure compliance with accessibility regulations. On the other hand, an accessibility statement is aimed at the general public and users of that application. Then, let's look at the purpose. The purpose of a VPAT is to provide product-specific conformance report. It outlines how well the product adheres to established accessibility standards such as WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and identifies any areas of non-compliance. In contrast, an accessibility statement offers a general overview of the organization's accessibility efforts. It communicates the organization's commitment to accessibility, highlights key features, and addresses known issues as well as future plans. Finally, there's the format. So a VPAT follows a structured template with conformance levels. This is a standardized format, and it ensures that all necessary information is being presented clearly and consistently, and this facilitates easy comparison and assessment by procurement officials. An accessibility statement is typically presented in a more narrative format. While there is a standard format for public sector bodies in the UK under the Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulations, for other organizations, so private sector organizations, public sector organizations not in the UK, this format can vary in structure. So now that we've seen what makes a VPAT different, it's also important to know that there are different types of VPAT. So each type is designed to address specific accessibility standards and regulations, ensuring that products meet their relevant requirements for their intended markets. So first, we have the WCAG VPAT. So this VPAT is based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are the internationally recognized guidelines for web accessibility. So the WCAG VPAT evaluates how well a product conforms to these guidelines, and these guidelines cover a wide range of recommendations for making web content more accessible. Next, there's the 508 VPAT. So this template is used to assess compliance with Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, a US law that requires federal agencies to make their electronic and information technology accessible to people with disabilities. Then you have the EU VPAT. So this is tailored to the European Union's accessibility requirements, particularly the EN 301-549 standard. So this standard is part of the EU's effort to harmonize accessibility requirements across member states, ensuring that products and services are accessible to all users. So any organization that is trading in the European Union needs to follow the EN 301 standard, even if they're not based in one of these member states. And finally, we have the international VPAT. So this template is designed to accommodate a range of international accessibility standards, making it suitable for products intended for a global market. And this helps organizational guidelines and regulations. So each of these VPAT types serve a specific purpose, helping organizations meet the accessibility requirements of different regions and markets. By using the appropriate VPAT, organizations can ensure that the products that they are buying or selling are accessible, compliant, and ready for their target markets. So now let's look at the different components of a VPAT. This is helpful for procurement teams to know how to interpret a VPAT, and for vendors or sellers to know how to create an effective VPAT to market their product or service more effectively. So we start with the preliminary section. This gives the reader an overview of the product and its current state of accessibility. So over here, you have the report title. And in the heading, and this is in the format of company name, so the name of the organization, Accessibility Conformance Report. So you might wonder why the term Accessibility Conformance Report, or ACR, is being used here. So Kiran will be going over ACRs in more detail later, but just to give you a quick summary, a VPAT is a template
Oh, I think we've lost you, Snigdha.
that can be used to create ACR.
Oh, we've lost you, Snigdha, unfortunately.
Any further?
Oh, I think so. Do you mind starting that bit again, just
Right.
for people that have maybe missed that there?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Do you know where exactly I got stuck?
I think you started talking about why it's got accessibility compliance report there.
Right. Okay. Sorry about that. I'll just start that bit again. So essentially, a VPAT, once it's completed, it can be used to generate a conformance report. So completing a VPAT can be the first step towards creating a fully complete, fully detailed accessibility conformance report. So once that's done, you have the VPAT version being used, and the most recent one is VPAT 2.5. So as of today, the most recent one is VPAT 2.5. Then you have the name of the product and the version. So this is the name of the product being reported, as well as the product identifier if necessary. Then you have the date of report publication, followed by a brief description of the product. Then you have contact information, so details of the team or the individuals responsible for the VPAT. And this needs to be included in case of any follow-up questions. Listing an email is generally sufficient. You have a section for notes, so a brief description of the product and the scope of that service. Then you have the evaluation methods used. So you need to include a description of the evaluation methods used to complete the VPAT for the product under test. So this can include details like the automated tools used, manual techniques such as code inspection or assisted technologies, which browsers and devices this product or service was tested on, and also who performed the evaluation. So for instance, in-house staff or third-party auditors. And then you also have the final bit of this preliminary section is the applicable standards and guidelines. So this is a clear indication of which standards or guidelines the conformance report covers, such as WCAG 2.2 Level A or Section 508 if it's a 508 VPAT. After the preliminary section, you have the conformance level table. And this highlights the conformance against a range of criteria. So for a WCAG VPAT, these criteria are based on the 55 criteria, success criteria covered under level A and AA. So things like non-text content, do images have alternative text, things like captions. So if you have multimedia like videos, do they have captions? So checks against each of these criteria is listed. And then you have the conformance level. So this indicates how well the product meets each criterion. So the levels typically include supports, partially supports, does not support, and not applicable. And each level provides an overview of where the product excels and where it needs improvement. And following this, there's often an additional remarks and explanations column. So here, vendors can provide explanations or context about the conformance level. So for instance, if you have non-text content and it fully supports, you can then just make a note saying that all images in this product have alternative text, hence it fully supports at that level. It's also useful to include the functional performance criteria. This is typically based on the Section 508 standards, and these criteria provide a snapshot of accessibility for different disability groups. So these are visual, auditory, speech, mobility, and cognitive impairments. So this also includes a column for conformance levels. So for either supports, partially supports, does not support, and not applicable. And it also has a similar remarks and explanations column. So by addressing these various impairments, by addressing it by being broken down into disability groups, so for instance, without vision, without hearing, so it's all about the different disability groups, these ensure that the product is not only technically compliant, but also user-friendly in real-world scenarios. And this holistic approach guarantees that the product is accessible to a diverse range of users, enhancing the overall user experience. So now that we have a better understanding of what a VPAT involves, let's take a look at the steps involved in creating one. So the first one is assessing the accessibility requirements. Is determining the applicable accessibility standards, so whether it's Section 508, WCAG, EN 301, and then also identify the specific criteria and levels to evaluate. So is it the functional performance criteria? Is it level AA against WCAG? Those need to be evaluated first. Then you evaluate the product. So conduct thorough accessibility testing using manual and automated methods, and also try to test with assistive technologies and real users with disabilities, since this will give you a more holistic overview of how well that product actually performs. Once this is done, move on to documenting the findings. So compile detailed reports on accessibility strengths and weaknesses, and include descriptions of how each criterion is met or not met. Once that's done, you can move on to populating the VPAT template with the findings from this evaluation. And at this point, you can clearly state the conformance level, so that supports, partially supports, does not support, or not applicable. Then you have to review and verify this template file, and also try to ensure that it can be replicated in different delivery formats, so such as HTML or PDF. And this is important because the final conformance report must be accessible. Review the VPAT internally for accuracy and completeness, and also ensure that the VPAT aligns with the latest accessibility standards and guidelines. So for example, if you're using WCAG, try to ensure that it is against WCAG 2.2, which is the most recent version. And finally, once all this is done, you can move on to publishing and distributing. So finalize the VPAT document and make it available to stakeholders. And if you're a vendor, distribute it to potential customers, procurement teams, and regulatory authorities as required. Also, while not universally followed, proactive organizations update VPATs periodically to align with updated accessibility standards, changes in the product, or feedback from users. And this ensures that the VPAT remains current and reflects any changes in product accessibility over time. So that was a brief intro into VPATs. Now let's move on to the more complete version of that, accessibility conformance reports. And back to you, Kieran.
Right, thank you very much, Snigdha. Yes, so we're now just going to dive into what an accessibility conformance report is. So just to get started, started, we'll just do a quick brief outline of what it is. So an Accessibility Conformance Report, or ACR, is a comprehensive document that details how well a product conforms to established accessibility standards. So this report is essential for understanding the accessibility status of a product and guide any necessary improvements. So an ACR provides clear understanding of the product's current accessibility features and areas where it might fall short. So this information is crucial for buyers, procurement teams, and other stakeholders to ensure that the product meets accessibility requirements before purchasing decisions are made. So typically an ACRs are completed by the vendor or the developer of the product. They'll conduct thorough evaluations and document the findings in the ACR to demonstrate their commitment to accessibility and compliance with relevant standards. However, in some cases, buyers may request an ACR from vendors to ensure that the product meets their accessibility needs before making a purchase. Excuse me, sorry. So on the right-hand side, you can see an example of the ACR for Google Drive. This is quite a good example. If you were interested, you can look this up, and it includes key information such as Snigdha mentioned, the sort of product name, the report date, a description of the product, contact information, and any notes for the evaluation methods used. So by examining an ACR, stakeholders can make informed decisions about the accessibility of a product and what steps are needed to improve it before maybe purchasing decisions are made. So now you're probably thinking, how does a VPAT actually differ from an ACR? Because they sound very different, or very similar, excuse me. So the first thing that's actually different between them is the level of detail. So an ACR provides a detailed analysis with descriptions of accessibility features and issues, and it offers an in-depth look at how well a product meets accessibility standards. Whereas in contrast, VPAT offers more of a kind of high-level overview with summary tables and conformance levels. So it's more of a broad strokes document that highlights the basic compliance criteria are met. And also the other difference is the purpose of it. So the purpose of an ACR is to conduct thorough accessibility evaluations and ongoing compliance monitoring. It's used to continually assess and improve the accessibility of a product. On the other hand, the VPAT is primarily used for initial compliance checks and the procurement process. So it helps organizations determine if a product meets basic accessibility requirements. And finally, the other difference is the format. So there's no set template for ACRs. This means that ACRs can be more customized to include various elements such as user scenarios, different testing methodologies, and more detailed explanations. So the lack of a standardized template allows for this greater flexibility and enables reports to provide context and insight to bring the product to be better evaluated than it would be if it was just a VPAT. So this detailed information can help stakeholders understand how accessibility issues are identified and addressed, offering more of a comprehensive view tailored to the unique features and challenges of the product. In contrast, as mentioned before, a VPAT is more of a structured template, or is a structured template focusing on specific criteria. It's more standardized, straightforward, and designed sort of more to convey, to quickly convey compliance information. So we'll now look at sort of different components of a VPAT as well. So there's a lot of similarities between a VPAT and an ACR. So there's things like the name, version, description, date of evaluation, contact information. However, there's a few differences in terms of, firstly, the evaluation methods used. So there we go. So the evaluation methods include, which includes more detailed descriptions than a VPAT and offers often includes details on the automated and manual testing used, and an ACR will incorporate quite extensive manual testing, analyses of specific interactions, and also include testing with users with disabilities, normally as standard. So it's a lot more detailed. So each testing method is then documented in detail with step-by-step processes, tools used, and specific findings. The application standards and guidelines used will also be in there, similar to a VPAT. However, often ACR will cover multiple different standards and guidelines as well, so it's important to keep an eye on that as well, depending on what market you're maybe selling into. And lastly, the conformance levels. So these are quite similar to a VPAT, but they will summarize how well the product meets various criteria, including comprehensive descriptions, specific examples, user impact analyses, and sort of really detailed contextual information and detailed comments about any issues that may occur. And lastly, similarly, it will have a similar to a VPAT, but it's more in detail again, just about the legal disclaimer to cover any legal implications or limitations of the report. So we kind of mentioned there about the usability testing that is often used within an ACR as well. So we'll look at that in a wee bit more detail here. So this is another example from Google Drive. So this is their usability testing section. So it covers specific tasks to ensure a thorough evaluation of the product's accessibility. Product's accessibility also includes user journeys, all the information garnered from that. So this level of detail is particularly useful for buyers and procurement teams. It provides a clear and practical understanding of how the product performs in real-world scenarios. So by examining these detailed user journeys and tasks, buyers can assess whether the product will actually meet the accessibility needs of their users. And then we've just got this example here. So it shows the amount of detail that's going into with each kind of task and each user journey that they're going through, and any issues that any users might have. And lastly, we'll have a wee look at the conformance level tables. So this is again quite similar to the VPATs that Snigdha looked at. However, it's again just about the amount of detail, breaks down how well the product meets specific criteria. So in this table, you can see listed on the left here with the sort of corresponding conformance levels, but it goes into a lot more detail. So in this example here, we've got time adjustable. So the table explains the different ways a user can manage time limits, such as turning off time limits or adjusting it or extending it. And then we've got, as I say, the partially support, but then over here on the right-hand side, we've got a really detailed description of how it meets the criteria and any exceptions that were, and they're clearly outlined with examples as well. So this level of detail is much more comprehensive than what you would normally find in a VPAT. So it's just that level of detail that's a big differentiator in there. So lastly, just a little bit about the importance of ACRs for buyers and sellers. So a lot of these will also be applicable to VPATs as well, but so keep that in mind. So the first one is just the trust and transparency. So ACRs and VPATs demonstrate a commitment to accessibility by providing detailed information about how well a product meets accessibility standards. Sellers can actually build trust with buyers, showing that they're actually taking accessibility seriously. It's also useful for informed decisions. So ACRs and VPATs help buyers evaluate the accessibility of products. This information is crucial for making informed purchasing decisions, so ensuring that, again, that the product meets their accessibility needs. And also ensures helps ensure legal compliance. So with accessibility regulations, so by documenting the conformance with standards such as WCAG or Section 508, organisations can avoid any legal issues related to non-accessibility compliance once they've bought the product and then put it out to their users. It also helps with competitor advantage. So accessibility can be a key differentiator in the market. So products that are accessible can appeal to a broader audience, including those with disabilities, giving sellers a competitive edge when they're saying, yeah, well, our product's accessible, you should buy from us, kind of thing. So it also provides practical insight. So ACRs provide detailed explanations and practical workarounds where necessary. So this information can be invaluable for buyers and procurement teams, as they can help their users who may need this additional information and how to best utilize the product or work around any existing accessibility issues. So in summary, ACRs are vital tools that benefit both buyers and sellers by promoting accessibility, ensuring compliance, and fostering trust and transparency. So now that we've had a wee look at ACRs in a wee bit more detail, I'll now pass to Snigdha, who will go over best practices for procurement and distribution.
Thanks, Kieran. So yes, as Kieran mentioned, we're now going to look at different steps to ensure best practices for procurement distribution, so both buyers and vendors. So there are a lot of similarities between accessibility statements, VPATs, and ACRs. However, they do serve different purposes, and it's useful to know the context in which they are to be used. For vendors, it's helpful to understand what sort of documentation they need to provide and what level of documentation needs to be included. For procurement teams, so for the buyers, understanding the similarities and differences between these documents can help with comparison as well as interpretation. We have gone over most of this in detail, so let's just take a quick look at the differences between accessibility statements, VPATs, and ACRs. So starting with the purpose, an accessibility statement conveys the organization's commitment to accessibility, while a VPAT summarizes the product's accessibility conformance, and an ACR provides detailed assessment of accessibility. They're also meant for different audiences. So an accessibility statement is meant for users of that product and for the general public. VPATs are geared towards procurement teams, and ACRs are for procurement teams as well as regulatory bodies. In terms of content, accessibility statements provide the achieved level of accessibility, known issues, and user guidance. Now, as Kieran mentioned earlier, the achieved level of accessibility is generally only required for public sector, and for private sector bodies, it's not needed. It might be superfluous, and instead explaining the issues, what they are, and the severity. So whether it's a high, medium, or low issue, might be better instead of just the overall achieved level of accessibility. For a VPAT, the content is the summary of accessibility conformance levels, while an ACR provides a comprehensive evaluation against these standards. In terms of format, accessibility statements, they tend to be more narrative and may vary in structure. VPATs are strongly structured templates with specific sections, and ACRs, they are detailed documents, but there's no standard template. So as we saw earlier, this allows for more flexibility in terms of the type of content and how much detail is there. So accessibility statements are not always required by law unless you're a public sector organization in the UK, but they do support transparency. VPATs are often required in public sector procurement, and ACRs may be required for detailed compliance checks, so by regulatory bodies who are trying to assess the accessibility of a product or service. And finally, in terms of granularity, accessibility statements provide a general overview but may lack detail. VPATs provide basic to moderate detail on conformance, and ACRs provide detailed evaluations with specific findings. So the next step is to engage accessibility specialists. So working with accessibility experts to create and interpret their documentation helps with accuracy and thoroughness, because experts ensure comprehensive evaluation of the accessibility of that product. So for vendors, engaging accessibility specialists ensure that their products are completely audited and the list of where the product performs well and that it doesn't hit the mark is documented effectively. For procurement teams involving experts in the buying process ensures that the product being procured is accessible, because accessibility experts will be able to interpret these documents more easily. And this is also helpful for comparing different products. Proper assessments help avoid potential legal issues from missed accessibility problems for both buyers and sellers. And this is because accessibility specialists, they bring in-depth knowledge and experience, which the product developers or procurement teams may not have. So for example, product teams, developers, procurement teams or developers, they may now have a thorough understanding of VCAG and similar criteria, which can help with both whereas accessibility specialists do, which can help with both creating VPATs and ACRs, as well as interpreting them for buyers. And finally, engaging accessibility specialists help with credibility and trust, because professional assessments increase that sort of credibility with both clients as well as users. Another thing we recommend is using ACRs and VPATs to track progress. So apart from legal and procurement requirements, accessibility documentation, such as ACRs or VPATs, can help with identifying accessibility issues. So VPATs and ACRs can pinpoint specific issues, specific areas needing improvement. So for buyers, this can help them understand where the product is lacking and how this might affect their users. And for vendors, this can be a point for future improvement. And this helps for planning for improvement. So developing a roadmap based on these findings to address accessibility issues helps both vendors and buyers to have a sort of roadmap in order to assess the accessibility of that product. And monitoring progress, so by tracking these improvements over time and updating documentation accordingly, or looking for updated documentation, is again beneficial for ensuring the accessibility of your products. So procurement teams can look for up-to-date documentation to assess whether the product is being more accessible. And this can also help them gauge their vendors' commitment to accessibility. By virtue of this, by regularly updating your accessibility documentation as a vendor, this showcases your commitment to accessibility and shows that you are working on that roadmap, you have identified those accessibility issues, and you are working towards improving them. And finally, it also helps with comparing different product updates. So for instance, if you're with one product, you're looking at either continuing with the same product, looking at different products. Just it helps with comparing the most recent, the most up-to-date version of that product, and then deciding how well it performs in terms of accessibility. We also recommend looking for VPATs and ACRs with granular ratings, or creating these ACRs or VPATs with granular ratings if you're a vendor. So there are some challenges associated with the conformance tag partially support. So partially supports can mean anything from minor issues to a near total non-compliance. So it's a wide range. If something is partially supported, it can mean that it might pose a minor inconvenience to some users, or it might be a complete blocker for certain user groups. And just that tag doesn't carry enough detail to to convey how accessible that product really is. And because of this, there's a lack of clarity, and it's difficult to accurately assess the true accessibility status. If you use granular ratings, so precise metrics such as 90% compliant with WCAG level AA or 50% compliant, this gives a better understanding of how well the product actually performs. So instead of just a more vague tag, which can be open to interpretation, it's more ambiguous. When you have precise metrics, it helps with comparison, it helps with understanding where that product falls on the scale of accessibility. This also helps with more effective goal setting for setting and achieving accessibility targets, and it helps with product comparison. So for instance, if you have two products, both of which are partially compliant against the same criteria, having these sort of granular ratings can help you assess which one is actually better than the other in terms of being more inclusive. And finally, ensure effective post-launch management by maintaining and improving accessibility over time. So for buyers, post-launch management is useful to check whether the products they've procured are indeed inclusive in real-world scenarios. And for vendors, this management can help improve their products over time and showcase their commitment to accessibility. So you are looking for VPATs that definitely have continuous improvements that are regularly updated, and they also maintain open communication with regular monitoring and testing. User feedback here is very helpful because it shows that you're actively seeking and incorporating feedback from users with disabilities. And this again ensures a more holistic overview of the product. It's not just against specific criteria, it's actually incorporating feedback from users. And this can help both vendors and buyers ensure that the products that they are selling or buying are accessible. So that's some tips for procurement and selling, and and buying. And now I'm going to pass on to Kieran to lead us to the conclusion.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we're just going to go through the conclusion now. So we'll just have a wee look at hopefully some key takeaways that you can take away from today. So the first one is just hopefully you now understand better the difference between accessibility statements, VPATs and ACRs, and also how to interpret them. So we discussed what these documents are and their role in accessibility and how they help in assessing and documenting the accessibility of products. So these documents serve a crucial role or a crucial tool for understanding and communicating the accessibility of your digital assets. We also discussed the importance for compliance and market advantage for vendors and buyers. So we highlighted the significance of these documents in ensuring legal compliance with standards such as WCAG or Section 508. Additionally, we explored how demonstrating a commitment to accessibility through VPATs and ACRs can provide an edge in the market by appealing to a broader audience, including those with disabilities, and helping out those user groups if you are a buyer. And also ensuring best practices for creating accessibility statements, VPATs and ACRs. So this includes detailed documentation of accessibility features and issues, regular updating to reflect ongoing improvements, and clear and honest communication. Accessibility status. Adhering to these best practices helps build trust and credibility with users and stakeholders. And lastly, just making sure that you keep your documents up to date. So we emphasize the need for ongoing management of accessibility compliance through regular evaluations and updates to your VPATs and ACRs. So this continuous process ensures that accessibility remains a priority and that the product evolves to meet changing accessibility standards. And also we mentioned a wee bit about the getting specialists involved as well. So if you'd like some help from us at UserVision, you can get in touch and then we can help you with creating your VPATs and ACRs. So please don't hesitate to get in touch as well. So just before we conclude on and move on to any questions you may have, we've covered quite a lot of ground today regarding accessibility statements, VPATs and ACRs. So at this point, we'd like to revisit our initial poll and just kind of see how comfortable you are now with VPATs and ACRs. We can hopefully see if there's a wee difference there. Hopefully. There we go. So I'm just having a wee look at the responses now. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. So some very confidence, some somewhat confidence. Great. That's great. That's great to see. Just hope after just an hour-long session, a lot of people are saying that they're a lot more confident. So that's fantastic. But yeah, so now we've kind of went over that. So that's a great to see that as well. So just before we kind of finish up, there's just a couple bits of information we'd like to let you know about. So I just want to quickly mention that we have a new service that we've launched. So we offer an accessibility accreditation program specifically designed to help organizations demonstrate their commitment to inclusive design and accessibility compliance. So if you'd like to know more, please feel free to get in touch. You can send us a wee email, or you can have a wee look on our website, uservision.co.uk, or we've also got the QR code here as well if you'd like to scan that. And we've also got some other training coming up. So if you've enjoyed today, you'll love our training. So we've got a training course coming up on the 3rd of September on the fundamentals of web accessibility. So again, these are all just on our website at uservision.co.uk. So, and we've also got the QR code there. So if you want to just have a wee chat about them, you can send us a wee email as well. But yeah, thank you all very much for coming today. If you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or if you have any questions that comes to you maybe tomorrow morning, you can send us a wee email. Me at kieran@uservision.co.uk or my colleague Snigdha at uservision.co.uk. So yeah, if there's any questions, please send us an email or anything like that. But enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for coming.